Part 20. Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 199. As soon as the wind blew up, it started to get dark outside. He waved his hand and called a two-wheeler, got on the car and said, "Go west." West. The driver looked back at Su Tong, "Where to the west?" Su Tong thought for a moment and took out $1 from his wallet. "Keep walking. I'll call you somewhere." Seeing the red dollar, the coachman's face suddenly became happy. He could only earn a few cents from pulling the coach for a day, but now he was working hard for 2 days. Immediately use your strength to run forward. Su Tong took out the letter in the car, opened it, and saw a poem written on it: "Go west to the Capitol Road in front of the door, lying down and watching the endless people coming and going. Don't worry about the road ahead without friends, no one in the world will not know you." Looking at the poem on the envelope, he couldn't help but squint his eyes. The other person used 2 poems spliced together for him. Of course, he wasn't trying to show off his literary talent. Walking west to the Capitol Road in front of the gate, you can lie down and watch the endless people coming and going. This is to remind myself to go west and to pay more attention to the people around me. Don't worry, there will be no friends in the future. No one in the world will know you. This sentence is a bit hard to understand. It can be understood as having 2 meanings. Going west, there are people you know well waiting for you, and the last sentence is intriguing. My identity is just a small forensic doctor who was transferred from the provincial capital. How can I be known to so many people? Combined with the reminder of the identity change after opening the legendary item, this sentence can't help but feel a bit threatening. Is someone trying to deal with him? Thinking of this, Su Tong suddenly became alert, not to the upcoming danger, but to Feng Lelu. I haven't figured out what happened with the note last time, so this time I gave myself a poem to remind myself of the danger. Assuming that Feng Lelu is really so powerful and knows everything about the world, why should it help him? Just because I'm handsome? Well, although I do look handsome. Well, to take a step back, Boss Feng Lelu has taken a liking to me just because he is handsome, but if he really wants to help him, why bother to look far away from the near and use an ambiguous poem to remind himself? Let yourself go west? After thinking about it, Su Tong could only think of one explanation. The boss of Feng Lelu wants to push himself out as a chess piece. There is a well-known story called The Sparrow and the Turd. The person who poops on himself is not necessarily a bad person, and the person who poops out of himself is not necessarily a good person. At the moment, Feng Lelu probably wants to shit on himself, but also wants to pretend to be a good person to pull himself out of shit. When he thought of this, Su Tong suddenly had no good impression of Feng Lelu anymore. But now he still needs to go west, because he still needs to confirm one thing. The driver made a lot of money out of thin air today, so he had to work extra hard to run. Don't think that pulling the cart is just a matter of brute force. You must know that the cart alone weighs about 50 kilograms, not to mention that there is a person sitting on it. How long can you run with brute force? I saw that after the driver increased the speed, his pace began to lighten up. He held the pull rod with both hands and jumped once a step. With the gravity of the car itself, his body could float briefly, and he ran faster and faster with his toes tapping. The cool breeze blew, and Su Tong actually felt like he was riding a motorcycle. He naturally noticed the driver's skills. This skill looked simple, and everyone could see the principle. It was nothing more than leveraging strength, but it was simple, but most people didn't have this skill. If they didn't know the trick and went to learn it rashly, I'm afraid 2 people would be in trouble. The next step is to turn people and cars over. Master, you're pretty good at pulling a cart. Have you ever learned how to pull a cart? He asked casually. Hey, to tell you the truth, I have a master who used to be a driver in Tianjin. With his ability to pull a cart, he has more than 300 drivers under his command. He is nicknamed Car Boss and is very famous. Later, the dealer was dismissed and he got old, so he returned to L City and passed on this skill to me. The coachman was full of pride when he said this, and he also mentioned some of his senior brothers. Instead of pulling a small cart, they started a business of collecting rags. They used a two-wheeled flatbed cart to go through the streets and alleys. Cars are useless, but they also rely on this skill to walk quickly and effortlessly. After just saying that, the coachman couldn't help but sigh, let's wait for another year. People nowadays don't like to ride on this thing. It's becoming more and more convenient to go out. People who have some money buy bicycles. I heard that there are trams in the capital. It's very convenient, and it's becoming less and less profitable to do this. Su Tong sat in the back and heard the coachman's sigh, and couldn't help but nodded. From a realistic point of view, this is the general trend. Speaking of the coachman's profession, it is also a low-level industry. But when the general trend of the times comes, they will naturally become the targets of elimination. This is the progress of the development of the times and the progress of the new era. There is nothing to regret. Just like coffin shops, paper shops are gradually being eliminated in reality, and the same reason applies. The car ran farther and farther, and gradually a forest and wasteland appeared in front of him, and the street lights disappeared. The driver gradually slowed down, we can't go any further. You see, this is the end. How about I take you back? No, you can go back. I'm just taking a walk here. Su Tong jumped out of the car and signaled to the driver that he could go back. This. The coachman hesitated for a moment, glanced around, and frowned, this place is far away, there is nothing. If you want to go back, you have to walk back by yourself. Seeing that MRSJ was of good character, Su Tong took out a pack of cigarettes and gave it to him, go back, I like quiet places. Besides, if you can run over, why can't I walk back? The coachman took the cigarette without being polite. He nodded and pulled the coach back. As he walked, he shook his head and muttered, people nowadays are really weird. Not long after the driver left, Su Tong looked at the path in front of him and started walking slowly. Further ahead was the Lotong processing factory. No, it should be called a non-ferrous metal processing plant now, and it is considered one of the first batch of key copper processing plants in the country. Before I even walked over, I could see the lights of the factory building in full swing from a distance. The words "Unity is strength" were also scrawled on the wall. It's almost 9 o'clock, and from time to time you can see workers walking into the factory gate talking and laughing. Su Tong simply squatted on the side of the road, took out his hookah pipe, slowly stuffed the cut tobacco into the pot, and slowly baked it with a lighter until the top layer of the cut tobacco had been carbonized, and then he smoked happily. Take a bite. Suddenly, the night was filled with smoke and clouds, a small wind was blowing, and the factory in the distance was in full swing, giving it a unique charm. I thought you could run so far, why did you stop just here? Then someone suddenly spoke in the darkness. Su Tong didn't look back, he just spit out the smoke in his mouth and looked at the factory in front of him. Guess what this place will look like in the future? Humph, it's nothing more than building more factories and buildings. Following a disdainful snort, a figure walked out, it was the Taoist priest from Fenglai Tower. He stared at Su Tong coldly, holding the hookah pipe in his hand, and frowned for a moment. For Xiaounman? What is your relationship with the Gao family in western Hunan? Su Tong did not respond to his question. Instead, he looked at the overgrown wasteland in front of him, and then at the factory in the distance. The land here will be very expensive in the future. Here is a huge shopping mall, and over there it seems it's Xiphon Park, so there must be a subway station here. When the Taoist saw that he didn't respond but was just gossiping, he couldn't help but sneered, isn't it too late for you to pretend to be crazy now? We have to calculate Zhang Yang's debt carefully. Su Tong glanced at him and nodded. He knew that there must be helpers behind Zhang Yang, and there were more than one. It was natural for him to be retaliated against. However, this did not interrupt him, and he continued to gesture. Do you know the subway station? It takes less than an hour to get here from the easternmost part of L City. It runs through the entire L City, allowing ordinary people to easily get there every day. Easily reach any corner of the city. The Taoist became a little impatient by his words. It's nonsense, what are you going to say? Su Tong raised his head and looked at him. What I mean is, if you are really too busy, you might as well work in a factory, maybe you can even marry a wife and live a peaceful life. You must believe in science. The corner of the Taoist's mouth twitched. What he hated most was this sentence. It was precisely because of this sentence that his Taoist temple was destroyed. Aren't you also a member of the fourth small Yinmen? Are you talking about science with me? I feel ashamed for your ancestors. No, 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 mine is an intangible cultural heritage, we are different. Su Tong defended himself seriously. The Taoist had obviously never heard of this word. He felt that it was getting more and more confusing as he talked about it, and his face immediately darkened. What nonsense! After talking so much, I just want to see what you can do. After the Taoist priest finished speaking, he swept the dust off his hand, and mist suddenly rose around him. The old Taoist stood in the mist, shaking the string of beads in his hand and breaking the rope, and the beads suddenly fell to the ground. As soon as these beads fell to the ground, they rolled down and disappeared. When I looked again, I saw many sneaky shadows in the mist. Looking at these crooked shadows, Su Tong stood up, patted the dust on his body, put away the hookah pipe, and raised his hands in a leisurely manner. Since you must do this, please accept my bow. Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 200. The Taoist was startled, then sneered, and casually put the fly whisk on his shoulder. Okay, you can use whatever means you have. The Taoist half squinted his eyes, staring at Su Tong's sleeves and neck. He had traveled far and wide, how could he see such a little trick? No matter how beautiful the words were, it was nothing more than an arrow in the sleeve and an arrow in the back. This kind of hidden weapon was indeed extremely lethal at close range, but in front of him it was just a child's play. The reason why he is so confident is precisely because he has this whisk in his hand. Don't underestimate this whisk. It can be soft or strong, offensive or defensive. There are only a handful of people in the world who can refine this whisk to the level he has. Just because this thing is there, even if the world's hidden weapons are in front of you, it can't do anything to you. However, the smile on the Taoist's face soon solidified, and Su Tong raised his hands. He did not raise his arms high to shut down the engine like Xiajian. Instead, he held his fists in front of his chest and moved slowly. Bow to yourself. Suddenly, a strong gust of wind rushed towards him. The Taoist had been guarding against the hidden weapon, but unexpectedly a huge pain hit his mind, his vision went black, and his head felt like a sap. The pain caused him to sway, almost falling to the ground like a drunken man. Spell. No, this is Taoist magic. The Taoist was shocked in his daze. If it was an evil spell, the Taoist robe on his body would definitely sense it and buy him time to defend himself. But this is not a spell, it is more like some kind of Taoist magical power, but I have never heard of Taoism having such overbearing magical powers. While he was horrified, the Taoist had no time to think about the strong wind coming in front of him, making him feel an unprecedented sense of crisis. He endured the discomfort and took a closer look, only to see that Su Tong-gren had already rushed in front of him. The slender figure is as fast as a tiger or a leopard, and it carries a chilling aura that makes people tremble with fear. This is not a murderous aura that can be cultivated by killing one or two people. Immediately his face changed drastically, he stepped on the 7-star steps, his figure moved back and forth quickly, and at the same time he made a hand and chanted a mantra, stepped on the 7-star steps, and pointed with his finger, "Go." After saying this, the Taoist's face turned the color of pig's liver. It was obvious that Su Tong's bow just now had already damaged his vitality. Now, forcing the shadow soldiers to move was even more serious. However, as soon as the shadow soldier moved, he saw dense black shadows surrounding him blocking his way, rushing towards Su Tong like a tide, which calmed the Taoist's mind. The rosary beads on his hand have a great origin. They are called the pearls of 10,000 hatreds. They were forged from the dead bones in the pit of the dead. They are not afraid of water, fire, swords, and combined with the art of sowing beans to form soldiers, even Taoist masters are hardly their opponents. However, facing the dark shadow in front of him, Su Tong raised his eyebrows and directly called the big fat man out and pushed him in front. I saw Zhang Yang using flames to burn the big fat body into pits, making the big fat appearance look a bit unbearable to look at, but only the surface layer was burned. Now the black shadow collided with him, making a loud noise, but was directly bounced away by the fat and sturdy paper armor. When the 1,000 blades were activated, the big fat man opened his hands, which turned out to be like a big net. He grabbed it forward with force, and the shadow suddenly shattered, revealing his true form, which was the rosary beads thrown out by the Taoist. These rosary beads were caught in the tentacles by the big fat net, and they hit each other wildly, even making bursts of screams. Su Tong, who was hiding behind, saw this and immediately realized that these seemingly inconspicuous rosary beads were actually wrapped with countless resentful souls. Perhaps it was because of Mr. Song, or perhaps because he was a member of the paper maker, Su Tong instinctively disliked this kind of thing. He called out the prop book and held the evil bell in his hand. As he shook the bell, the evil sound was activated. All of a sudden, there was a flood of ringtones, which actually turned into sound waves visible to the naked eye in the air. These beads were invulnerable to weapons and water and fire. When they hit the sound waves, they would immediately make a sound like fried beans and explode in the air. The sound of ghosts. It consumes 5 script points to produce spiritual attacks on targets within 15 meters and cause huge damage to ghost-like creatures. There is a 20% chance that the ghost will be temporarily unable to move. There is a 10% chance that the ghost will be driven away. Cooling time, 1 minute. Note, the sound of ghosts and monsters is originally a sound of joy and joy. Please be careful when using it, because it may bring you bad luck. Everything happened too suddenly. By the time the Taoist realized something was wrong, his precious rosary had been shattered into pieces, which made it even worse for him who was not already wealthy. A breath of blood spurted out from my chest, and I cursed in my heart, Zhang Yang mistaken me. It was the information provided by Zhang Yang that this guy had evil fire skills and was good at close combat. After some discussion, they asked him to take action to avenge Zhang Yang. Because his 10,000 hatred beads are treacherous and changeable, not afraid of swords, water, and fire, plus he has practiced Taoist martial arts, and can wield a dust whisk unless he is a top-notch master in the world. He concluded that this kid was bound to die, but he didn't expect that he would end up like what Zhang Yang said. Completely different. Seeing that the orb was completely destroyed, the Taoist was heartbroken. When he took a closer look at the bell in Su Tong's hand, he couldn't help but exclaimed, "Why is this bell in your hand?" Su Tong, who was hiding behind the big fat man, stuck his head out and grinned at the Taoist. "I picked it up from the garbage dump, do you believe it?" "Bah, I believe you." The Taoist let out an angry cry, stepped on the 7-star steps, turned around and planned to escape. However, he was fast, and Su Tong was not slow either. He put away the bell and big fat, and activated the active skill leopard attack of the leopard soul cloak, and his speed suddenly increased by a level. He jumped 5 or 6 meters away with a quick step, and was chasing behind the Taoist in the blink of an eye. When the Taoist looked back, his legs were trembling with fright, and he almost fell to his death when his foot slipped. There are so many masters in the world, but when it comes to top masters, there is no one he doesn't know. In today's world, the top masters have long been unable to retreat, and the masters of the three religions dare not show their faces rashly. He knew all the top masters in Shijulu, and this kid who appeared out of nowhere had amazing strength, and his Qinggong skills were so terrifying. Thinking again about the bell on this boy's hand, the Taoist became more and more nervous and felt that there was too much mystery about this boy, making it difficult to grasp. Thinking of this, the Taoist gritted his teeth and suddenly turned around and stopped. Seeing him stop suddenly, Su Tong thought this guy had some special tricks up his sleeve and stopped quickly. Etc. The Taoist paused and said, "We are all grasshoppers on the line. Now we are in the end of the world. The overall situation has changed for thousands of years. My little brother is a poor man who has no eyesight. You are so noble. I will make the decision today. What will happen between us? Can Liangzi just get married?" He couldn't fight, and he couldn't run away, so the Taoist was so free and easy that he just wanted to surrender. Su Tong really didn't expect the Taoist to be so neat and tidy, and looked at him with a smile. "No." After that, he added, "Tell me first, what is your relationship with Zhang Yang, and why Guo Jinhua's body was faked? What are you planning? Tell me, and I will let you go." "Hey," the Taoist slapped his thigh and scolded, "Zhang Yang, this idiot, we can only be regarded as Taoist friends. I really don't know the Guo Jinhua you are talking about. As for what we are planning, little brother, where to start?" When Su Tong saw that the Taoist had completely ignored him, his face suddenly turned evil. "You really treat me like a newcomer and let the monkeys show off. It doesn't matter if you don't tell me. I will send you to the bureau. We will see when the time comes, say it or not." As soon as he heard this, the Taoist's expression suddenly became tense, and he waved his hands repeatedly, "Don't dare, don't dare." After finishing speaking, he pondered for a moment, as if he was thinking about something, and then said after a moment, "Little brother, although you are very capable, we brothers are not vegetarians. If I can't go back today, someone will come to pick off your head tomorrow. Please note it's easy to block an open spear, but it's hard to defend against a hidden arrow." After Su Tong heard the Taoist priest's words, he hesitated. Seeing this, the Taoist hurriedly continued, "Little brother, I see that the bell in your hand just now seems to belong to the old 8 section. I see that you have built a bridge with that old guy from Cayman, and you should also be a disciple of the 8 section. I know that there are some strange arts in the world that make people hard to guard against, so let me remind you, have you ever heard of sitting on a fairy stake?" It's a good thing that the Taoist didn't mention it. As soon as these 3 words were mentioned, Su Tong turned his head suddenly, his eyes flashed coldly, like a vicious wolf, which made the Taoist's heart tighten and the hairs on his body stood up. But fortunately, Su Tong quickly restrained his seductive gaze, and he asked with a smile, "Oh, you know how to sit on a fairy stake?" Seeing that his eyes gradually calmed down, the Taoist relaxed a lot. He secretly breathed a sigh of relief and thought to himself, "Good guy, where does this kid have such a strong evil spirit? He is the same as those old guys. Could it be that he is also participating through the war of resistance?" But then I thought about my age, so I could only swallow these confusions, shook my head at Su Tong, and walked slowly up the first few steps. This is a Jianghu magic. Of course I don't know it, but one of us knows this skill. Once this skill is activated, people thousands of miles away can be killed invisible. No matter how powerful you are, you will be like a god sitting in your arms every day, invisible and intangible. The pressure on your chest is getting heavier every day, torturing you day and night, and you will eventually die. Su Tong noticed the Taoist approaching and raised his eyebrows slightly, but his heart was full of murderous intent. How could he not know how to sit on the immortal stake? Every time Mr. Song mentioned the master, he would think of the master who died miserably, became thinner and thinner, and finally died. At that time, I couldn't even touch any flesh on my body. Hearing what the Taoist said, he had to wonder if the person who plotted against the master back then was the person the Taoist said. Seeing Su Tong's expression change, the Taoist took 2 more steps calmly, staring at Su Tong's wrist. Suddenly, a cold light appeared in his eyes, and he grabbed it with one hand like lightning. I saw that his fingers were like hooks, and there was a smell of rust on the fingertips. It was the iron sand palm that the Taoist had practiced hard for many years. This was an extremely sinister move in the martial arts world. It was specially designed to break the Taebao's skills. If this hand was clasped on Su at Tongmei Gate, his whole practice can be destroyed and his life can be destroyed in an instant. However, just when the Taoist's hand was about to catch Su Tong's wrist, he saw Su Tong suddenly flip his hand, and a pistol appeared in his hand. The black muzzle was pointed at the Taoist's eyebrows with a bang. There was a hole in the Taoist's head and he fell straight to the ground. Taoist priest, times have changed. I have already said that we must talk about science. Looking at the Taoist priest's body, Su Tong sighed. In fact, he had no intention of killing him. He just wanted to die himself, so he couldn't blame anyone else. He took out the demon bell, the bell swayed, and with a faint ringing sound, Su Tong stretched out his palm and grabbed it against the Taoist priest's forehead. Guard the soul. Sorry, I took the high-speed train to Kunming today and rushed all the way, which caused the update to be late. I am really sorry. I have to fly back to Luoyang tomorrow. The update may be a little late in the past 2 days, but after I get home and settle down, I will go to Xiahe. The house is ready. We will update more quickly when the time comes. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 201. Diddy. Police cars roared through the streets, and apparently the gunfire still alerted the officials. But Su Tong had already erased his traces long ago, threw the Taoist's body into the prop book and quickly left the scene. It's not that he is looking down on the police, but that the police's investigation methods are still relatively backward under the constraints of the times. In reality, as soon as he fired the gun, the nearby patrol police would arrive in less than 3 minutes, and at the same time, the eyes of the sky would quickly lock on every intersection around him. Even the cameras in front of small shops will become the eyes of the police. Police dogs, patrol officers, traffic police, and criminal police will block the intersection for you before you leave the area. Not to mention there are drones conducting reconnaissance operations above your head. Unless there is targeted premeditation and every step of the retreat is calculated in the early stage, it is almost impossible to get rid of the police's pursuit without using the jack mask. In fact, he didn't go too far. After all, it was already very late. If a person was walking on the street, he might be stopped for questioning. Even if the problem was not serious, it would still leave some suspicion. There happened to be a Daejeon hotel not far away. Su Tong walked in and saw 3 shirtless men drinking wine and playing cards. There was no front desk and no need to register. After knowing that Su Tong wanted to stay, a red-faced man squinted his eyes and took the key to open a room for 2 for Su Tong. The price, it was cheap, 2 cents a night. The environment is not very good, the toilet is public, and the room is filled with a damp smell and even a smell of smelly feet. It is close to the train station. I believe anyone who has stayed near the train station will understand this environment. Fortunately, there were not many people staying, and he was the only one in the room at the moment. He didn't care if the environment was bad. Compared with the rancid environment everywhere in the previous script, this place was already much better. After closing the door, Su Tong sat by the bed. He put a cute little paper pig in his pocket and placed it on the table. The paper pig twisted its body with difficulty and looked like a crab with every step. Looks particularly gratifying. Except for Sutong, probably no one would have thought that this honest and clumsy-looking paper pig could actually be a Taoist who kills people without batting an eyelid. Speaking of which, he was unlucky enough to meet Sutong's Shankao. At this time, this unique skill is still hidden by the master, and has not yet become famous in the Bamang tournament. Naturally, the Taoist didn't know how powerful Bai Shankao was, so he suffered a big loss suddenly. Otherwise, how could Sutong kill him so easily? Of course, having said that, Sutong was still not good at learning, and the power of Shankao was far from being fully unleashed. It only severely damaged the Taoist. If it were his master, he would probably kill the Taoist instantly. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but think of that time when they met on the train. The master quietly changed his gestures with a dark face. Fortunately, he took out the magic bell early, otherwise he wouldn't know how he died. Every time he thought about it, he couldn't help but murmur in his heart. At this time, the Taoist on the table seemed to have adapted to the paper pig's body. Although he could not speak, he raised his cute little pig's trotters and pointed at Sutong. Sutong poked the belly of the paper pig with his fingers and knocked him over on the table. Before he could get up, he gently pressed his fingers on his pig's head to make him lie on the table unable to move. If you want to be reborn, just cooperate with me honestly, otherwise I will throw you into the cesspit. After hearing this, the Taoist priest really didn't dare to move anymore. He couldn't change the fact that his body was dead. Even though he wanted to die with Sutong in his heart, he immediately gave up when he heard that he was going to be thrown into the cesspool. If he was really thrown into the cesspit, the result would be more uncomfortable than never being reincarnated. Dirty things, whether they are gods or imps, are all shunned. Being trapped inside not only has to endure the filthy air, but even ghosts and gods are not welcome to see you. As time goes by, you will really never be reincarnated. Seeing that this guy was no longer gesticulating, Ying found a pencil, cut off a section of refill and gave it to him, and asked him to crawl on the paper and write down what he wanted to know. It was nothing more than the same questions as before. This time the Taoist wrote very seriously. He wrote every stroke neatly. It took him more than half an hour to write Sutong's questions clearly. It turned out that there were 7 of them in total. Some of them met by chance, and some were drawn in by acquaintances among them. Zhang Yang was one of them. The leader of the 7 is a guy named Qinzhu. This guy is the most mysterious. He wears a mask every time he summons them. Qianshu's age cannot be checked, but the Taoist has talked with him several times and feels that this guy is unfathomable and knows many secrets that they don't know. He even heard Qianshu say by chance that he participated in Yuan Datu's ascension to the throne. Ceremony. You must know that Yuan Datu announced his accession to the throne in 1915, and it is now 1968. Qianshao can participate in such an important event as the enthronement ceremony, and can escape unscathed afterwards. It is absolutely impossible for Qinzhu to be a young boy. Even if we consider him to be 20 years younger, I would conservatively estimate that he is at least 70 years old now. He is definitely the Voldemort who survived the Republic of China era. The Taoist mentioned that he was able to sit on the immortal stake. It was from this thousand hands that he learned about it, and it was also confirmed by him that this guy could sit on the immortal stake. As for Guo Jin, who is matter, the Taoist really doesn't know because he is not responsible for it, but it is speculated that it has something to do with the bald man next to Zhang Yang, Monk Ming. What they are planning, the Taoist can't tell, because everyone is responsible for different things. The only people who really know the core secrets are Qianshu and Han Zhonglong among the 7. Looking at the information written by the Taoist, Sutong nodded, and then asked about Feng Lelu. Just when the Taoist was about to write and was about to continue writing, there was a sound of footsteps outside the door. Sutong's mind moved and he grabbed the Taoist on the table in his hand. After a while, he heard a knock on the door. He opened the door and saw the shirtless man who had opened the room for Su Tong before walking in with 3 people. "I'm sorry, brother, our bed is full, and there are 3 more people here. There is really no room, so I can only let you make do with it for one night." The big man pointed to the 3 people behind him and said to Su Tong. A dark-skinned old man stuck his head out and smiled at Su Tong. "Brother, I'm sorry, you sleep on the upper bunk, and we 3 brothers sleep on the floor. We will sleep for one night and leave without disturbing you," the old man said and patted the quilt on his back, fearing that Su Tong would not agree. Suddenly 3 more people were crowded into the same room as him. Su Tong originally planned to simply give up the room to them, and then go out and find another hotel. But at this time, a man from behind stepped forward, apologized to Su Tong with his hands in his hands. "Oh, isn't this brother you? Oh, I didn't expect to meet you here, what a coincidence, big brother, second brother, hurry up, come in, this is my brother, no need to be so polite." As soon as the man spoke, Su Tong was startled at first, but he quickly realized it. He glanced at the man's sleeves out of the corner of his eye and saw the familiar ink, and a look of surprise appeared on his face. He quickly stood up in cooperation, took the man's hand and said, "Oh, what a coincidence, I didn't expect to meet you here." It was indeed a coincidence. Su Tong did not expect that Gao Zhou, who he had been looking for most of the day, would actually meet him here. While I was surprised, I also thought of the poem given to me by Feng Lelu's boss, "Don't worry about the road ahead without friends." This made him feel a little more mysterious about Feng Lelu's boss, and he couldn't help but be more wary of Feng Lelu's ability to predict the future. The 2 people at the door couldn't help but look at each other. As for the owner of the hotel, since they all knew each other, he didn't need to waste any words and turned around and left. Gao Zhou took advantage of the handshake to quietly write the character Feng on Su Tong's palm, and winked at him. Su Tong immediately understood what Gao Zhou meant. Patting Gao Zhou's arm, he looked at the 2 people outside the door. "Brother Feng, these 2 are. Haha, let me introduce to you. This is my eldest brother Zhu Xiang, and this is my second brother He Huangzai." After speaking, Gao Zhou turned around and introduced to the 2 of them, "Eldest brother, second brother, this is It's Uni, a good brother I met while traveling abroad." Zhu Xiang nodded and cupped his hands towards Su Tong. "Patch Wan's brother, are you an online friend? Is Feng's brother a local?" "It's not online, it crawls out of the eagle's talons." Su Tong clasped his hands and responded, "I'm not a local, I just came out of the police station." Zhu Xiang and He Huangzai couldn't help but look at each other after hearing this, and their expressions suddenly relaxed. "Don't worry, eldest brother and second brother, these are really our brothers. Let's talk. Let's go out and buy some food and drinks. Let's have a good drink tonight." After saying that, Gao Zhou pulled Su Tong out. When the 2 of them walked out of the hotel door, they saw Gao Zhou whispering, "Why are you here? I haven't asked you this question yet, why are you the 3rd child?" Su Tong glanced at the hotel behind him and asked Gao Zhou. Gao Zhou was also depressed when he mentioned this matter. After he entered, his identity was just that of a gangster, not from City L. As soon as he entered, he encountered a street melee. Following the prompts of the side mission, he rescued these 2 guys, but ended up being mixed up. "I just mingled with them," he said in a low voice. "These 2 people are not ordinary. They are beggars in the lower reaches. They said there was something big going on in L City and they wanted to give me some insights, so they brought me here." Gao Zhou didn't know how to describe it when he mentioned it. He originally planned to take a bus to L City, but he followed these 2 beggars and had to live and eat all the way. Fortunately, they were not far from L City, otherwise he didn't know when he could get there. "Come here." "So, have they said what the big deal is?" Of course Su Tong knew that this big event might refer to the Bamang Mountain Conference, but the details were not clear, and he was still confused as to what was going on. Although these two are beggars, they are not ordinary beggars fleeing for food. Simply put, they are a gang of beggars. There are huge information networks among each other across the country, otherwise they would not have said that they would bring Gao Zhou to Mayor L experience. That's not mentioned, but the second child, he Huangzai, mentioned that they were invited by an expert from L City. This expert's name is, oh, yes, his name is Qinzhu. I still have to catch a flight today, and I have to get up after a short sleep. The next one may be a little later. Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 202. It's him again. Hearing this name, Su Tong frowned unconsciously. I just heard this person's name from the Taoist, but I didn't expect to hear this person's name again in the blink of an eye. It looks like what the Taoist said is true. This Thousand Hands has a grand plan and is even quite famous among the 3 sects and 9 streams. With an order, all the masters in the world rushed to L City. Su Tong immediately told Gao Zhou about his situation. After Gao Zhou heard the whole incident, his expression suddenly changed slightly and he squinted in the direction of the hotel behind him. In that case, how about? He stretched out his palm and drew a line on his wrist. The idea was to simply kill these two beggars so that they would not turn against Su Tong after they saw Qinzhu. No. Su Tong shook his head. He now felt that no one in the world knew him. Once Jianshu knew that the Taoist had died in his own hands, his life would be difficult. What's more, the jade piece on his body is also a troublemaker. It is conceivable that his next road will be full of thorns. 2 more and 2 less have little effect, not to mention that Gao Zhou still needs 2 people to lead the way in order to sneak into the opponent's camp and provide him with information. I still say what I said, if things really get to the worst, you should disband the team and be ready to leave at any time. If I come back alive, I will make up for your losses. Gao Zhou pouted, then who have I become? Why won't my father beat me to death when I go back? The 2 of them worked together and agreed to meet at the big drum above the drum tower every 3 days in the morning to exchange information. After the discussion, Su Tong did not follow Gao Zhou back to the hotel, but left directly. Before leaving, Su Tong did not forget to give Gao Zhou a big gift. It was none other than the Taoist corpse. Master. Gao Zhou didn't recognize the Taoist, but he looked up and down and immediately knew that this corpse was unusual. It looked like he was not too young, but his hands were white and clean, and his skin was delicate and shiny, better than that of an 18-year-old girl. Iron palm. After Gao Zhou thought about it for a moment, he remembered that the old man once mentioned it to him when he was still alive, saying that iron sand palm was the most sinister skill. The name sounds domineering, but in fact it is a sinister and vicious martial art. In addition to stir-frying iron sand with both hands on the brazier every day, you also need to soak your hands with various special medicines. It is said that after mastering this skill, the old skin on your hands will quickly recede, and your fingers will be white, thin and soft. Most people will not see anything special about these hands. If it weren't for the Taoist's age that really didn't match the hands, I probably wouldn't have guessed at this. At first glance, this man was a master of martial arts. Gao Zhou was surprised that Su Tong killed a young master so quickly, but this corpse was also a rare material for him. He put the corpse away, grinned and said, "This is a good feeling. Just before I entered, I just improved my corpse control skills, and I was about to use this to test the experimental results." After collecting the body, Gao Zhou said goodbye to Su Tong for the time being. Su Tong walked quickly and soon disappeared into the night. As for how Gao Zhou would resolve the matter after he returned, that was his own business. He didn't plan to go back to the police force. He threw his clothes on the spot and left. No matter how great Zhao Jian's background was, he probably wouldn't be able to survive this time. Moreover, the script space has reminded him that if he loses his identity as a police officer, he will be scolded and kicked out if he returns. So it doesn't make much sense to go back. I urgently need a hiding place now. Just as he was thinking about it, he didn't know where he was going. He just felt that the road in front of him became more and more desolate, and he could still vaguely see some graves. This place had no front and no shops. It was pitch black from a distance, and it was hard to tell the difference between east, west, north, and south. Even Su Tong, a local snake, had to admit that he seemed to have lost his way. Correct. At this moment, he suddenly remembered something, walked to a grave, and thought to himself, I don't know, so I might as well ask. Speaking of which, among the 3 moves my master taught me, the first one was to search for graves and ask for directions. I haven't had time to use it until now, so I'm going to give it a try today. I saw him take out 3 sticks of yellow incense from the props book, insert it into the grave, shape a paper man with his fingers, recall the formula given to him by his master, and throw the paper man in front of the grave. Suddenly, he saw the paper man actually standing in front of the 3 incense sticks, letting the cool breeze blow without moving. Su Tong's eyes lit up when he saw this, and he quickly threw down a handful of paper money. As soon as the paper money was spilled, the paper man really started to move slowly, flew up lightly, caught all the spilled paper money in his hand, and then handed it over to Su Tong Gong. Su Tong knelt down and asked the paper figure in front of him, "Excuse me, is there any place to stay nearby? It would be best if it is less crowded and quiet." I saw the paper man pointing to the west with his hand, and then actually floated up under a gust of breeze and flew towards the west. Upon seeing this, he hurriedly followed the paper man and passed through a bush cemetery. Only then did he see the paper man slowly stop on a stone and stop floating forward. When Su Tong came up, the paper man pointed ahead. He followed the direction pointed by the paper man and saw 2 black stone cows lying in front of a dilapidated temple door. He looked at the plaque on the temple door and saw 3 words written on it. Shanking Palace. Hey, it turns out I've walked up Mang Mountain. As soon as he saw the Shangqing Palace, he immediately knew where he was. It turned out that he had walked to the west unknowingly and walked up Mang Mountain in a daze. And this Shangqing Palace is the benchmark building on Bamang Mountain. Although the temple gate is so small, it is said to be the place where Lao Tzu made alchemy. It was built in the Tang dynasty and was a national-level building at that time. Emperor Jiaozong of the Tang dynasty honored Laozi, Li Er, as Emperor Xianyuan, so Shangqing Palace was also called the Temple of Emperor Xianyuan. Later generations respected me as Tai's Hang Lejun, so it was also called Lejun Temple. Of course, times have changed, and things inside have changed. Now I stand at the door and go inside to take a look. In addition to the main hall, it still retains the style of an ancient temple. The side halls on both sides are small houses built with red bricks. If it weren't for the words Shangqing Palace written on the temple door, at first glance, I would have thought it was an inconspicuous private courtyard. In fact, Su Tong is also very curious as to why I would go to this ghost place to make elixirs when I have nothing to do, but now this place is indeed a hiding place. At this time, the paper man cupped his hands towards Su Tong, meaning that he could only be sent here. Before Su Tong could speak, the paper man ignited a ball of green fire and disappeared in the air without a trace in an instant. Ugh! The paper man left suddenly, leaving him unable to even be polite. This couldn't help but remind him of the way the paper man looked respectful to his master when he was looking for his grave and asking for directions. He couldn't help but smile bitterly in his heart. It seemed that even a ghost was quite realistic. Before entering the temple door, Su Tong knocked on the door symbolically to make sure there was no one inside before stepping in. Scanning the surroundings, he saw 2 old trees standing in front of him, with several stone benches for people to rest under the trees. There was no one in the temple. Su Tong walked into the main hall and saw some offerings placed under the dusty statue of Lejun. However, Looking at the steamed buns that are already hairy on top, it seems that the tributes have been placed here for a while. It is estimated that they were casually placed on top by someone who happened to pass by here. Looking up, he immediately smiled. The famous Lejun Temple is even known as one of the sources of Taoism. The temple is small and shabby. You can see the stars when you look up. It turns out that most of the roof has collapsed. It is really sad. After thinking about it for a while, it seems that the Shangqing Palace has been restored in reality, but its reputation is pitifully small and only known to local people. Maybe no one outside of L City knows about it. He randomly found a relatively clean place, lay down on the ground, and used the quilt as a bed. At the same time, he did not forget to call out 2 paper figures to guard in the corner. Once there is any trouble, he can immediately control the paper man to give himself a chance to fight back, and then fall asleep as soon as he closes his eyes. He didn't know how long he had slept, but the sound of footsteps made Su Tong slowly open his eyelids. I saw a dirty man walking in from the door. The man had shaggy hair and a dark face. His eyes were rolling around, but there was a bit of stupidity in his eyes. After looking at Su Tong, he just grinned and ran out again. Fool. In doubt, I saw the fool running in again after a while, but this time the fool was not empty-handed. He was holding a handful of flowers and threw them on the altar table. He grabbed the steamed buns that were all hairy on the altar table and squatted aside. Eat it in the corner. While eating, he smiled innocently, looking so silly and silly that it made people feel a little distressed to see him. Don't eat it. It's all broken. You'll get sick if you eat it. Eat this. Su Tong sat up, took out 2 ham sausages and a piece of bread from the props book, and placed them in front of the fool. The fool looked at it and the smile on his face became a little thicker. He was not afraid of Su Tong. He grabbed the bread and stuffed it into his mouth without even tearing open the bag. Seeing this, he could only help the fool to tear off the packaging bag. The idiot here had just taken 2 bites when he suddenly heard a noise outside the door. A middle-aged man walked in. When he saw Su Tong, the other person was startled at first, but soon locked his eyes on the idiot, and his face darkened. Why are you here again? Get out of here. I'll give you what I have nothing to eat. The man cursed the fool, but when he turned around, he still took out a piece of clothing and threw it to the fool. Pick it up from someone else's. It's getting cold, so take it back and wear it. The fool took the clothes and ran out with a smile. At this time, the middle-aged man looked at Su Tong and said with a smile, I'm sorry, he is a fool in the village. In fact, it's not too stupid to say stupid. If you ask him to help with something, he won't refuse and give it to him. Just order something to eat. I didn't scare you. Let me introduce myself, Taoist Shit, who is the Taoist resident in the temple here. Shit Taoist. Su Tong didn't expect that there was a Taoist priest in such a dilapidated temple, but after looking up and down, he didn't look like a Taoist priest. He was wearing a short-sleeved shirt that had been dyed black and white, and he looked as dirty as a fool. Even the road number is so strange. Just when he was wondering if this guy was a charlatan, a smell of feces wafted over him, making Su Tong frown subconsciously. But it was the smell of feces that suddenly reminded him of what Mr. Song had told him. That story, his eyes suddenly lit up. Oh, it turns out it's you. After traveling all day, I finally got home. No more tonight. I will take some time off tomorrow to recuperate, adjust my schedule, and then we will start to update more. Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 203. You recognize me? Chang Miao was greatly surprised, and looked at Su Tong with anticipation. But Su Tong's next words couldn't help but disappoint him. Su Tong shook his head. I don't recognize him. He indeed did not recognize this Taoist Chang Miao, but when Mr. Song took him to visit his master's tomb, the two of them walked on the road to Bamang. Mr. Song pointed at the Shangqing Palace from a distance. I told myself a story about the true monarch of 100 Dung. At that time, I just thought the story was a bit funny. An ordinary man with a hand stained with excrement beat a Quanzhen Taoist who was upright in the 8 sutras and made him jump up and down. In the end, he got some advice from an expert and he really understood a set of exercises of his own. From then on, he became a leader in Shijuliu. This story, no matter how you listen to it, is as legendary as the protagonist in a novel. However, this legend actually appeared in front of him, which made him feel a little melancholy. It seemed that he felt uncomfortable with Su Tong's looking eyes, or maybe Su Tong's answer made him very unhappy. In short, his face sank and he said angrily, "Have you seen enough? Since you don't recognize me, what did you mean just now? Are you kidding me?" Seeing that he seemed angry, Su Tong hurriedly explained, "No, I mean, this place turns out to be yours. I want to stay here for a while. Do you agree?" Borrowing. Chang Miao looked Su Tong up and down, frowned and said, "It's okay to stay overnight. There is a room next to it with a bed. You can live in it with just a few things, but..." When Chang Miao said this, she couldn't help but raise her head and rubbed her fingers. "I want to give you money." In fact, Chang Miao didn't ask for much. The price was 1 penny a day, so Su Tong directly gave him 2 yuan. Surprisingly, after Chang Miao took the money, she did not put it into her pocket, but pulled out a merit box from under the altar table. Listening to the banging sound inside the box, you knew there was nothing inside. Seeing that Chang Miao was about to invest the money, Su Tong frowned. "These $2 are enough for you to eat and drink for a month. Why do you want to invest it in this broken box? Do you really think this mud lump can protect you?" After a long moment of joy, his thin face was extraordinarily simple, and he respectfully threw the money into the box. Then he stood up and said to him, "I know this is a lump of mud, but we live under the gate of someone else's temple, and this always happens. There needs to be an explanation." Ugh! Su Tong was speechless for a moment, and he knew that he was not a true Taoist. He was doing this just to have peace of mind. In fact, putting this money here is just a formality. In the end, this money will be used to cultivate Taoism. Then Chang Miao tidied up the side room for him, saying that Su Tong could live here in the future and would not be responsible for the food, but there was a vegetable garden in the back with cucumbers, tomatoes, and small greens. They were all free of charge. Although the kitchen is simple, but it's no problem for cooking and other things. However, Chang Miao still requested that Su Tong clean the Taoist temple at least once every day, so Su Tong agreed to this small matter. In this way, he had a hiding place, and 2 days passed in the blink of an eye. In the past 2 days, Su Tong did not only bask in the sun, but also read books. He lived a very leisurely life. He also wanted to take the opportunity to observe what the legendary Lord of 100 Dung looked like on a daily basis. After all, this person is also a legend, and it is interesting to be close to a legend. But after 2 days of observation, I found that Chang Miao lived a very simple life every day. She got up before dawn to water the vegetable garden. After watering the ground, she went to defecate and came back at night. After coming back, I just ate something and lay down and fell asleep. As for what I wanted to see, such as chanting sutras, meditating, practicing martial arts and boxing, I didn't see it at all. This inevitably made him a little disappointed. Maybe the real Lord Beidong was such an ordinary person. After all, there was still a difference between legend and reality. However, although I was a little disappointed, I found that it was quite comfortable to live here after staying here. He, delicious. That day, while he was reading a book, he saw the fool squatting in the corner, holding the snack Su Tong gave him and eating deliciously. This idiot has been very diligent in visiting the house in the past 2 days. Every time Su Tong comes to visit, he will give him some snacks. But he didn't eat in vain. After eating the snacks, he picked up the broom and cleaned the yard seriously. This was originally his job as a resident, but now it was handed over to a fool, which saved himself some leisure time. I can read more books. It's not that he likes to learn, it's just that the Qingyun magical record that Mr. Song left for him contains many strange arts, which is what he urgently needs to know now. After all, he had killed the Taoists sent by Qinju, so he might not know what methods this Qinju would use to deal with him. Reading more books, whether for leisure or accumulation, would never go wrong. For example, Mr. Song wrote about fools in his book. Of course, the fool in the book is not the same person as the one in front of me, but the content of the story matches the fool. Although he was not sure, when Chang Miao came back in the evening, he went out of his way to confirm with Chang Miao and learn about the fool's past. Don't underestimate fools. If you follow what Song Lao wrote, fools actually have an unknown identity as village guardian. The village guardian is also known as the town spirit person. This person committed one of the 5 evils, committed 2 of the 3 deficiencies, eliminated 1 of the 3 souls, eliminated 2 of the 6 souls, and suppressed 8 charms, 3 evils, and 5 diseases. There is no need to notify every family in the village when there are weddings and funerals. The fool is always the first to know, and he will take the initiative to come to the house to help. Such people generally will not eat at the table, nor will they take the initiative to ask for things from the host. They will only wait for the table to be cleared. Just pick up some leftover food from others. According to the old book of Song Dynasty, the village guards had the luck blessing of the city god behind them. To put it bluntly, they were officially running errands under the hands of the city god. Chang Miao is also considered an online person. She knows the fool's past. It is said that he was a fool from birth. His parents left him in the field to fend for himself when he was 2 years old. It was an old cripple who raised him with goat's milk. When there was a severe drought, fools could still catch mice. Then they would hang mice at the door of whose house it really couldn't survive. Just relying on these inconspicuous mice, the village really survived. It is precisely because of this incident that the people in the village don't say anything about it, but they are grateful to the fool in their hearts. They never eat and drink too much for him. Anyone who has leftovers will leave some for him. They will also give him some during the holidays. Treat him to a nice meal. Su Tong doubted whether the fool was the village guard written in Song Lao's book, but this did not affect his affection for the fool. Every time he was given more food after work, he would not want it. He smiled happily and ran out. Leaving aside this matter for the time being, there was another thing in the book that aroused my strong interest. The content talks about an evil thing that happened to Mr. Song before he became a disciple. That night after he got off work from the factory, he went drinking with his friends. After 3 rounds of drinking, he saw that it was getting late, so he left the bar early to go home out of fear that his family would be worried. As a result, he was almost at the door when he suddenly heard someone calling him. Maybe he had drunk some wine. Mr. Song didn't care at that time and just walked forward. But after walking a few steps, Mr. Song suddenly looked at it and saw a 10 yuan bill lying on the ground. He immediately became excited. That was a 10 yuan bill. At that time, his monthly salary was only 15 yuan and 36 cents. Mr. Song immediately reached out to pick it up, but before his hand touched the money, he heard someone suddenly shouting from behind him, "You can't make enough money, but your life is numbered. If you take other people's money, you have to give it to others. It's worth your life." He looked back and saw an old lady pulling a young girl walking behind him. The girl was holding a bamboo basket in her hand. She was pretty and had almond-shaped eyes and willow eyebrows. Mr. Song felt his heart pounding when he took one look at it. "I feel like I have never seen such a beautiful girl in my entire life." Su Tong read a few lines down. The words were all Mr. Song's praise for the girl. Goosebumps stood up on his arms. At that time, Mr. Song's eyes were all on the girl. The old lady, what he looks like, I didn't write at all. Fortunately, as he continued reading, Mr. Song finally remembered that he was not writing a love letter and brought the content back to the topic. At that time, he only thought that the old lady was lying to him and wanted to keep the $10 for himself. Unexpectedly, the old lady seemed to see through his mind and turned the money over with a cane. He saw that there was a note stuck behind the $10 bill. He knelt down and took a look. There was a line of small words written on it, "You will pay for it in the next life." Seeing this line of small words, Mr. Song's heart skipped a beat. He didn't believe in this stuff, but he always felt that he was holding back his energy to harm others, and he felt very uncomfortable regardless of whether he was caught or not. The old lady asked him to pick up the money, throw it into a tree hole nearby, and cover it with soil to avoid harming anyone. Mr. Song was still confused at that time. Wasn't he not allowed to touch the money? The old lady later explained to him that this money is called longevity money. If you take it with a greedy mind, you will be fooled immediately. If you don't have such greed in your heart, even if you take it, it won't be a big deal within an hour. Mr. Song asked at that time why he couldn't tear up the note. The old lady didn't explain to him. She just said that the key to the art was greedy words. The cause and effect of the person who applied the art and the one who resisted his fate would naturally come to an end in the future. After that, the old lady took the girl away. He looked at the girl's back and stood there for a long time until she disappeared. Then he hid the money in the tree hole as the old lady said in a daze. As a result, 3 days later, the man across from his neighbor suddenly died. I still recognized the deceased, named Gao Yang, who was a few years older than him. Because there was a large birthmark on his face, covering 1/3 of his face, he couldn't find any serious job. They didn't know each other well, but because of their relationship with neighbors, they still came to pay their respects. As a result, when I walked to the door, I heard their relatives talking about Gao Yang. They said that this kid took out 10 yuan from the tree hole, showed it off everywhere, and invited people to drink in the middle of the night. As a result, he drank too much and fell into the moat. Everyone was deformed when they found out. Mr. Song continued to write, but it was already a few years later. He said that only after he followed the master did he realize that this kind of money to ward off disasters was a black magic in the lower world. What is being exploited is the result of people's greed, but this magic can only last for a week. After 1 week, no one is tricked, and the magic is dissipated. Moreover, the caster is definitely not a foreigner, he must live in the surrounding area. It's a coincidence that 2 years later, the Zhang family gave birth to a child on the street. As a result, the child had a large birthmark on his face. Later, the child grew up to do evil and gambled away all the Zhang family's property. Jiang's father and his, after arguing, he was beaten to the point of paralysis. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 204. There is actually nothing outstanding about this little story. But Su Tong was particularly interested in this, because under the story, there was a date written at 10 p.m. on August 28, 1968, posted in Guo Alley. And today happens to be July 26. This is a bit interesting. Based on the time and place, can I find Mr. Song in this script space? When he thought of this, he suddenly felt excited. Tonight, Chang Miao came back earlier than usual. It was obvious that he was in a good mood. After getting paid today, he bought some pork liver and a bottle of wine. Then he cooked 2 side dishes himself and called Su Tong to come and eat together. After getting along for the past 2 days, Chang Miao felt good about Su Tong, a sudden guest. After all, life will be more comfortable if there is someone to talk to. Coupled with Su Tongren's easygoing appearance, he naturally became Chang Miao's emotional trash can. After drinking too much, he couldn't help but complain in his heart about his sufferings over the years. Listening to this, Su Tong couldn't help but sigh that the fate of the future Lord Bai Shi was also miserable enough. In fact, their family was originally a middle farmer, with several acres of land. Their father was a carpenter, and my mother was good at needlework. She could always make some money to supplement the family income by sewing and mending every month. However, a few years ago, there was a severe drought and the crops failed. His parents were too old to survive, and he was the only one left in the family. It happened that the house was dilapidated and leaking, and they managed to survive the severe drought. However, floods broke out again, and their home was directly washed away. My parents are gone, my home is gone, I am alone and confused. Relying on this abandoned Lejun temple to have a place to stay and sleep, I have been able to survive until now by hauling dung trucks for others every day. He felt that Mr. Lao Jun had protected him, so he stayed here by himself. In the past few years, he had forgotten his own name. He claimed to be Taoist Chang Miao, but behind his back everyone called him Taoist shit. He didn't care what it was called. The last thought in his mind was to build up this Taoist temple. This thought kept him up, otherwise he would have jumped into the well and ended the suffering in the world. Chang Miao was so strong that he didn't know how to drink at all. After eating 2 mouthfuls of pork liver, he drank a glass of wine. Before Su Tong could finish half the glass of wine, he lay on the shabby wooden bed and fell asleep. "Mom and Dad, I miss you." Under the candlelight, Chang Miao hugged the quilt, tears rolled down her face, and the smile slightly raised at the corner of her mouth made people feel sad. Su Tong stood up and covered the legend with a quilt. After exiting the room, he lay on a chair in the yard with half-squinted eyes. When he turned his hand, the cute little pig appeared in his hand. It's a pity that it can't talk, otherwise it can chat with him. Su Tong found an iron box for him and threw it in it, asking him about 1,000 hands and writing as much as he knew. In addition to Senju, there is news about others. Promise him that as long as he is willing to help you, you may be able to help him, and it is not impossible to give him a chance to revive the dead. Upon hearing this, he was willing to help him resurrect his body. The Taoist's 2 pig ears stood up, and he started writing with a charcoal pen in his hand, writing down everything he knew. After writing for half an hour, I finished writing on both sides of a piece of paper before handing it to Su Tong. He picked it up and took a look, and was surprised that the Taoist knew a lot. The Taoist man really didn't know why Jian Hand wanted Zhang Yang and others to kill, but he knew from his friends that this time the world's masters were gathered in L City, and it was said that a heavy treasure was born. But Kongbao is just a pretext, the real target is people. It is not clear who the Taoists specifically targeted, but Jian Shu has said that this is the last great opportunity after Yuan Daidu ascends the throne. Once they miss it, people like them are destined to become the dust of history and will never be restored. Su Tong looked at what the Taoists said and didn't take it seriously, because he knew that this guy must still be telling the truth. He squeezed out bit by bit like toothpaste, for fear that Su Tong would throw him in when the squeeze was empty. It is understandable that you should go into the fire and save some truth to save your life at critical moments. But he wasn't in a hurry. This guy didn't speak, so he had plenty of ways to slowly grind him down. At the moment, it was most important to find out who the people around Senju were, what their names were, and their origins. After reading the list provided by the Taoist, Su Tong nodded, threw the Taoist into the iron box, closed the lid and threw it into the room. Putting the jack mask on his face, his appearance changed into that of Chang Miao. He also changed into shabby clothes, and then rode out the door on Chang Miao's bicycle. Today was the day he had made an appointment with Gao Zhou. The two had agreed to exchange clues at the drum tower. Taking advantage of the darkness, he quietly climbed up the drum tower and hid the message written by the Taoist on the top of the big drum. Press it with a stone. The top of this drum tower is locked, and most people won't come up at all, so I don't worry about being taken away by others. I checked the time and saw that it was only around 4 in the morning. I finally made it out and I was not in a hurry to go back. Standing on the drum tower and looking around, I saw a dim light bulb lighting up the street not far from the drum tower. When he came, it was completely dark over there, and he didn't even notice that there was a store open over there. His eyesight was very good, and it was night, so with the blessing of dark vision, he could see the door at a glance. There is also a sign hanging in front, beef offal soup. So early, looking at the words on the sign, Su Tong couldn't help but feel hungry. He happened to be hungry himself, so he went back after eating enough, and brought some for Chang Miao and Fool by the way. Take one back. Thinking of this, Su Tong jumped off the drum tower and rode his bicycle towards the shadows ahead. L City is known as the Soup City. People's love for soup is as much a necessity as the old gentlemen in Paris drink coffee in the morning. It was only 4 o'clock in the morning, and dim light bulbs lit up the streets. I saw that the huge iron pot was already steaming and bubbling. You could see the beef tumbling in the pot, rising from time to time and then sinking quickly. A bowl of soup and a cake. Sitting at the front desk was a young man about the same age as Su Tong, holding an old book and reading intently. Suddenly, after hearing Su Tong's words, he raised his head in surprise and glanced at the wind chime hanging at the door. Seeing that the wind chime didn't move, the young man's eyebrows relaxed a lot. After receiving the money, he stood up to make soup. Su Tong looked at the changes in the young man's brows, and suddenly felt strange. He turned back and glanced at the wind chime, but he didn't see anything. He just felt that the young man's eyes seemed a bit strange just now. He seemed surprised to have come in. Looking at the soup restaurant in front of me, maybe I arrived too early. Apart from him and the young owner, there was only a middle-aged man wearing a small vest sitting in the corner. It's cool outside today. It's most comfortable to eat outside. It's too stuffy in the house, the young man said to Su Tong while handing over the bowl full of soup. Su Tong looked back at the small bench at the door and shook his head. I'm not in the habit of sitting on the small bench. After saying that, he sat on the table with the bowl in hand. Seeing him like this, the young man didn't know what to say. He looked at the time and sat back down at the front desk, holding the book, sword, enmity, and enmity. In the steaming big bowl, there is a thick layer of red oil floating on top, with chopped green onions and coriander floating on top. The aroma rises as soon as you move the chopsticks. This shop only makes beef offal soup, but the taste of it made Su Tong's eyes light up. He took a sip. The soup was fat and fresh, with an aftertaste of beef offal. The beef liver and intestines inside were moderately soft and hard, and the taste was, it's cooked just right, not tough or woody. Pair it with a pancake and soak it in. After it is soaked in the broth, it will have a unique flavor. Just like the old gentlemen in Paris who can refill their cups of coffee, the soup is infinitely refillable. Su Tong drank a bowl first, then shouted to the boss to refill the soup for him, plus 2 large pancakes. The young man put down his book, walked to the soup pot, sprinkled a handful of chopped green onion, and poured another bowl of soup. This soup is a bit fat. Eat too much and it will make you tired. Eat slowly so you don't choke. It's okay, I just love this one, Su Tong said with a grin. Of course he could hear that this young man seemed to have something in his words, but he didn't care. On the contrary, he had a little expectation. Seeing that he could not be persuaded, the young man stopped trying. He looked at Su Tong sitting on the chair and starting to make pancakes again. He smiled coldly in his heart, "Humph, just eat it. Don't blame me when you feel uncomfortable later." Looking at the time, The young man strode to the middle-aged man in the corner, sat down, took out a cigarette and handed it to him. The middle-aged man was in a daze. When he saw the cigarette handed to him by the young man, he shook his head numbly. The soup is almost cold. If you wait any longer, the golden rooster will crow. The young man said and put the cigarette to his mouth and started smoking. Ken. The middle-aged man reluctantly turned around and glanced at the time on the clock on the wall, as if he still had something to say. For a moment, he seemed to have thought of something, and took out a wad of money from his arms and placed it on the table. I have money, I can give you money. The young man glanced sideways at Su Tong and saw that Su Tong was concentrating on making pancakes, frowning and smoking without saying anything. Isn't it enough? I still have more. I can give you as much as you want. At this time, the middle-aged man began to take out thick banknotes from his arms and put them on the table. These banknotes were all blue-gray $10 bills. The thick stack was scary to see. There are at least 100 pieces in this stack. You must know that the average salary now is only more than 10 yuan. Just a thick stack like this is enough for a poor family to go straight to a well-off society. But the middle-aged man seemed to have endless money on him. He kept taking out more and more money from his pockets and clothes. Finally, he opened his mouth, and his throat and mouth seemed to be stretched open, vomit. In an instant, money flew out of his mouth and scattered all over the table. I have money, I have money. Seeing this, the young man frowned and pushed away the money that fell on him in disgust. His face gradually turned cold. Look again, are these really money? The middle-aged man was startled and looked down, only to see that all the money in front of him had turned into white paper. No, it was not even paper. The young man picked up a piece of paper with his fingers and blew it gently, and suddenly it turned into white paper. The bubbles completely disappeared without a trace. Born in the dust, you will return to the dust. You can't take it with you in life, but you can't take it with you in death. It's ridiculous that you had a lot of wealth during your lifetime, but you can't even get a dime out of it after you die. Not even a kid is willing to take you in for reincarnation. Let's go, I'm here. If you can't wait for the right person, you'd better not come to my place in the future. It's bad luck. I'll give you this bowl of soup. After the young man finished speaking, he picked up his chopsticks and stabbed the pancake in front of him hard. Suddenly, the rich soup in the bowl and the thick pancakes on the table quickly deteriorated and turned black, and emitted a foul odor. The middle-aged man's face gradually turned rosy, as if he had had a good meal. At this time, the young boss looked sideways at Su Tong, thinking that this kid must be too scared to speak out. As a result, when he turned around, the proud smile on his face suddenly froze. Su Tong's eyes widened and he held the bowl. Instead of being frightened, he ate with gusto. Seeing him, he even ate it in one breath. He drank the soup and said, "Boss, this show is really good for dinner. Let's have another bowl." Infinite script killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 205. The young man was stunned for a moment, then he saw Su Tong slap the table, put a thick stack of cinnabar red money on the table and said to the middle-aged man, "Take it away, just think of it as a reward for the performance. It is enough for you. The little ghost will lure you to reincarnation, and if you have enough money, the little ghost will serve you comfortably in a sedan chair." Looking at the Mingqian on the table, the young man's eyes widened, and when he looked at Su Tong, his eyes were almost filled with stars. The middle-aged man even ran up to Su Tong and was about to kneel on the ground. Su Tong's toes were just under his knees, indicating that he didn't need to bow, just take the money and leave. It would be dawn soon. If he missed the time, he would have to wait until tomorrow night before he could leave. One day would be hard on his soul. It's hard to wait. "Thank you, benefactor, thank you, benefactor." The middle-aged man was about to leave as he walked, but when he reached the door, he seemed to think of something. He turned around and said to Su Tong, Benefactor, I think you are also a kind person, but you are much better than some people who are stone-hearted. As the middle-aged man spoke, he looked at the young man beside him with small eyes. It was obvious that this hard-hearted sentence was given to him, which made the young man feel particularly sad. He thought to himself, "Did you drink my soup in vain? Speaking of which, my family unfortunately had an unfilial son, but my family has been in business for generations, so we still left a few things behind. These things are not worth a steamed bun to a person who doesn't know the goods, but those who know the goods are willing to pay 1,000 gold instead of hiding them in the soil. It is better to give it to the benefactor, and it will also end the fate between us." The middle-aged man was originally named Lukuadong. His family has been in business for generations. When he was young, he went abroad to study. His vision was broad and his thinking was forward-thinking. After returning to China, he inherited the family's assets and his business was prosperous. However, he had a son who was really unable to hold up the wall. He often stole some money from the store and went out to eat, drink and have fun. Now that the family business was temporarily closed and there was no income, he began to use the little money in his pocket. Lukuadong was wary of this unfilial son. Unexpectedly, this unfilial son was so bold that he sent Lukuadong to meet the king of hell with a dose of poison. But how could such a thing be hidden from the police? After all, poisoning is the most obvious characteristic. Ordinary people can tell at a glance that the color of the body is wrong. As a result, the boy from the Wang family was exposed. As a result, the funeral could not be held and he was buried in a hurry. Not even a penny was burned to him. He was an invisible rich man with millions of dollars in wealth. After his death, he was so poor that he could not afford a penny. He hid from the sun during the day and was buried at night. He was bullied by other wandering ghosts and finally hid here, relying on the food the young man gave him to survive until now. Today, after receiving Su Tong's money, Lukuadong finally had the means for the kid to lead him. Lukuadong gritted his teeth and simply told Su Tong what little he had in stock. This can be regarded as a kind of repayment. It is better than being buried in the soil. After Su Tong noted the location, Lukuadong hurried away and disappeared into the dark night. At this time, the young man came over, took his bowl, and walked quickly to the soup pot. Not only did he refill Su Tong's bowl of fat soup, he also added a lot of meat, and brought it to Su Tong with small steps. "I didn't expect you to have such ability, uncle. I won't accept you for soup money. You can accept me as your apprentice." Because Su Tong was wearing the jack mask at this time and changed into a long and beautiful appearance, he did look much older than the young man. However, he smiled and said nothing to the young man's words and just immersed himself in drinking soup. The young man was still sitting aside and introducing himself non-stop. "His name is Wang Gong. He is not doing well in studies and cannot get into school. The family decided to let him come to the store early to help with the business. In addition, this boy is bold, careful, and hard-working, which makes him gradually start to change from his father's generation. I took over the night shift in my hand. Just now he put chopsticks in one hand to see off guests, which was what his father taught him. If you walk too much at night, you will always encounter something dirty. The soup shop has been open for a long time, and occasionally you will meet customers like Lukuadong. This trick of inserting chopsticks to see off guests is also a last resort trick. According to his father, it was taught by an expert in the past. The wind chime at the door was also left by that expert. Unfortunately, his father learned this trick. This made Wang Gong feel very unhappy every time he thought about it, and blamed his father for not learning more tricks. Now I happened to meet an expert today. How could Wang Gong let go of such a great opportunity? It's a pity that Su Tong still smiled and said nothing about this. After finishing the soup and eating all the meat, he patted his belly happily. Under Wang Gong's long-awaited eyes, he only said two words, "No receive." After saying these two light words, Su Tong stood up and left. But when he walked to the door, he suddenly remembered something and turned around and said, "Do you often encounter soup customers like that just now?" "Well, there used to be few, but recently there have been a lot of them. One comes every 2 days, and I drive them away." Wang Gong himself found this strange. There used to be some, but meeting one or two by chance throughout the year is considered too much. But recently, he seems to be in trouble. One comes every now and then, and sometimes 2 or 3 come, which makes him nervous. That little doorway can barely hold on. If it weren't for their soup, which couldn't be turned off at night, I'd probably have planned to close the restaurant. That's it, Su Tong nodded. This is a good place. The main purpose of practicing Beishinko is to accumulate yin virtue, but how can he usually have so many opportunities to cultivate yin virtue? Since this place is so easy to attract these ghosts, it would be a good idea to make a treasure trove for yourself to gain experience. Thinking of this, Su Tong glanced at Wang Gong again. "I can't accept you as my apprentice, but I will come over every 3 to 5. Don't rush out of those guys. I will help you deal with it." When Wang Gong heard that there was such a good thing, it could not only help him get out of trouble, but also open his eyes. Maybe he could learn a few tricks secretly. There was no reason not to agree, so he immediately nodded and agreed. Watching Su Tong leave, Wang Gong started punching on the spot excitedly, thinking that he could be like the protagonist in the novel, get good luck and start like Chen Jiaoluo, with unparalleled martial arts, invincible, and chivalrous fighting, scary. Just as he was lost in thought, he suddenly looked back and saw that Su Tong, who had just left, was standing outside the door, looking at him with squinted eyes, holding a small pot in his hand. Get some soup and take it away." In an instant, Wang Gong's face turned red to his ears. He immediately lowered his head to take the small pot and went to make soup. Growling. The rooster at the end of the village began to crow in the still dark sky, and like the fixed alarm clock, people also woke up from their sleep. When Chang Miao woke up from her sleep while rubbing her head, she saw that Su Tong had already heated the soup. Chang Miao's face lit up with joy when she saw it. She soaked the remaining pork liver from last night and started to nibble on these 2 big steamed buns. After eating, Chang Miao changed her clothes and went to poop. Su Tong didn't clean up. When it was around 9 o'clock, he saw the fool stepping into the gate of the Taoist temple on time. Su Tong pointed to the still warm broth, and the fool happily hugged the small pot and started to eat. After eating, the fool carried the dishes and chopsticks to the sink and started to put them away without his instructions. The idiot here was washing the dishes. Suddenly Su Tong's ears twitched and he looked sideways. He heard the hum of a car engine outside the door. His heart moved and he quickly put the jack mask on his head. Not long after, he saw a man and a woman walking in from outside the Taoist temple. When he looked up, Su Tong was a little surprised. He saw that the people coming were the same mother and son he met in the building last time. The two walked into the Taoist temple, looking left and right, looking at the red brick house and Taoist temple in front of them, with disappointment on their faces. When they saw Su Tong sitting in the sun basking in the sun, the two finally looked a little strange. "Master, we are tourists. I heard that this is the place where I made alchemy. Can we visit it?" When Su Tong heard this, he immediately jumped up from his chair. "Infinite Heavenly Lord, welcome." Fortunately, Chang Miao was not here, otherwise just seeing Su Tong imitating his money-obsessed eyes and timid expression, I would have doubted whether this was his long-lost brother. The three of them walked into the main hall and saw the dilapidated statue of Lejun and the holes in the roof. The mother and son couldn't help but look at each other. The disappointment on their faces could no longer be concealed. "Hey, it's a pity. I once heard that this place is also one of the sources of Taoism. I can't believe that it is now in a state of change." The man shook his head, held out the fan in his hand, and saw a red ticket floating out of the fan. A little incense money, master, don't be too little. Don't dare. Su Tong took the money and looked at the mother and son in his mind. He felt that these two people definitely did not look like serious tourists, but they just didn't know what they were doing here. This mother and son were not on the list given to him by Taoist Zizou. Just when he was confused, the woman suddenly tightened her fingers and grabbed her son's arm. The two of them looked around and saw the stone tablet that the fool was stepping on. They took a closer look and saw the signature on the stone tablet. They couldn't help but trembled and looked at each other. The open door of the familiar pit is a big green monument. The man couldn't help but scream in surprise, but soon realized that he had said the wrong thing, and quickly turned back to look at Su Tong. Seeing the confused look on his face, I felt relieved and thought that the news was indeed correct. It looked like this Taoist was a stickler. Thinking of this, he and the woman next to him looked at each other, and the woman said, "This Taoist priest, can you tell the little girl's fortune? Let's see what her future holds." I saw the woman saying that as she brought up a $10 bill. Su Tong's eyes almost popped out when he stared at the $10 bill. He immediately took it and put it in his hand to look at it carefully, as if he had never seen money before. At the same time, he glanced out of the corner of his eye and saw that the woman's son had walked up to the fool pretending to be casual, staring straight at the stone tablet under the fool's feet. Seeing this, Su Tong already knew the identities of these two people. They were a pair of land shovelers. The so-called shoveling land refers to someone who does not open a shop but only travels to rural areas to collect goods, or is a person who robs ancient tombs. The two of them came here, presumably because they heard that Shangqing Palace was once the predecessor of Lejun Palace, so they came here to dump the cultural relics. Sorry, I had already written it, but I corrected some typos. I didn't pay attention to the time, so it's a little late. Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 206. Taoist Priest, I just saw that the calligraphy on the stone tablet on the ground is very beautiful. It happens that my father is also a calligrapher. I want to take it back as a gift for my father. I wonder if the priest can give me a price. The man squatted on the ground and asked Su Tong tentatively. However, as soon as he finished speaking, everyone heard a clang, and the hand of the idiot washing the pot slipped, and the iron pot and bowls and chopsticks were suddenly knocked upside down on the man's head. There was still unwashed sewage in the pot, which was poured down from one end, turning the man into a drowned rat in an instant, and his expensive white suit was immediately stained with water stains. Asshole! When had the man ever been treated like this? He threw the pot on the ground and waved his hand to attack the fool. Stop! Dinger must not be rude. The woman stopped him in time and stepped forward to take a look. After seeing the fool's foolish look, she raised her eyebrows slightly and turned her head and said, "He made an unintentional mistake. Why do you need to get angry with a fool?" When Sun Ding heard this, he looked at the fool, and saw that the fool was standing in the corner, laughing, his face suddenly brightening and darkening, and his eyes becoming cruel. He smelled his clothes with disgust on his face, and a greasy smell of chopped green onions and beef was stained on them. He felt nauseated and retched a few times. He glared at the fool fiercely, and then looked back at Su Tong. "Taoist priest, I sincerely purchase it, please give me a message from the Taoist priest." Sincerity. A sneer appeared on Su Tong's face. "You are a fatherless person, how dare you say such things to me sincerely?" When Sun Ding and the woman heard this, their expressions suddenly changed. Sun Ding even walked up and said with a dark face, "What nonsense are you talking about?" The woman stood in front of him and stared at Su Tong coldly. "If the Taoist priest doesn't sell it, he won't sell it. Why bother to say hurtful words?" Su Tong felt funny in his heart when he saw the annoyed looks of the two people. He squinted his eyes and glanced at the faces of Sun Ding and the woman, pretending to pinch his fingers as if he was calculating something. He looked at the woman for a moment. Madam, didn't you want me to tell your fortune? The bridge of your nose is tight, low, and sluggish, showing your bones. The wings of your nose are flat and collapsed, and your mouth is big but not thick. You have a sharp nose and a sunken uterus. He was born with a handsome face. After saying that, he looked at Sun Ding again. Your Excellency, you seem to be full of heaven, and you are indeed a blessed person. However, when you were young and wandering around, I'm afraid you suffered a lot looking at your low brow bone, sun horns sinking, and moon horns rising high. Ha ha, it is self-evident that you can defeat your father. Just the two of you. If his father were still alive, he would have become a monster long ago. The two of them couldn't help but gasp when they heard this, and the woman swayed and almost fell to the ground, but Sun Ding hurriedly held her up with his hands. Seeing this, Su Tong continued to pour cold water. Although you mother and son have similar faces, they are not related by blood after all. They are just in name only. These words hit a nerve in the woman's heart. Sun Ding was also flustered by what he said. When he looked at the Taoist in front of him, his eyes were filled with awe. The two of them thought that the Lejun temple had long been ruined, but after inquiring, they learned that Chang Miao who was guarding here was just an ordinary manure worker, and they didn't take Chang Miao seriously. Who would have thought that this dung worker would be so powerful? Just by looking at the two of them, he could clearly see their backgrounds. He couldn't help but feel a surge in his heart. Sure enough, El Earth God is crouching tiger, hidden dragon. Let's go, don't bother me here anymore. There are countless barren hills in Bamang, and there are also many evil ghosts. If you want to shovel the land, it depends on your own ability. After Su Tong finished speaking, he put his hands back and was too lazy to look at them again. Now Sun Ding and the woman looked at each other. Cold sweat broke out on their foreheads, and they felt cold on the back of their collars. Everyone could clearly hear the slanderous words they spoke. This was a kick at the door of the King of Hell's house. If he didn't leave, he would be seeking death. Immediately, the woman hurriedly took out a wad of $10 bills from her wallet, put it on the table respectfully, clasped her hands on her chest and bowed to Su Tong. We were the ones who offended the Taoist priest blindly. It's a small gift, please Taoist master, please do not refuse, we will leave now. After the woman finished speaking, she quietly raised her head and saw Su Tong looking at them with a sneer on his hands behind his back and a sneer on his face. Her heart skipped a beat and she hurriedly pulled her son out and walked out. When she reached the door, she still didn't forget. He knelt down and kowtowed to the temple door, then hurriedly got in the car and left. As the car started, they drove farther and farther away from the Taoist temple behind them. Instead of relaxing, the mother and son felt their hearts beating violently. It was still the dog days of summer, but there was air conditioning behind them. I have heard it before. It is said that there are masters in the world who are proficient in the changes of yin and yang. They have the Dharma eyes to look at people's faces and know their fortunes. They had heard of such rumors before, and there were many Feng Shui masters in Hong Kong under the banner of divine fortune telling, but they had never been so accurate and so fast. They didn't even need to ask a question. They just glanced at them and told them. They see so clearly. Hey, let me tell you, countless heroes have been buried in the land of Bamang since ancient times, but how can an ordinary person guard the Lejun temple? The woman took a deep breath and tried to calm herself down. She originally wanted to fish in troubled waters this time, but now it seems that this Bamang League meeting may not be as simple as they thought. Auntie, do you think you should let the brothers go back first? I heard what the man meant, and it seems that the implication is to warn us. Sun Ding recalled the Taoist's joking eyes, and he murmured in his heart. Forget it, let the brothers stay put for the time being and wait until the old guys like Qinzhu, Zhuying, and Washenzi arrive. Even if this shit Taoist is really an expert, facing these three old monsters, you may not be able to take advantage. Yes, when the time comes we will fish in troubled waters. A sneer appeared on Sunding's face. But the two of them didn't know that the master in their eyes was lying on the chair at this moment with a smile on his face. Looking at the thick stack of banknotes, there were at least $1,000. This income alone was enough to repair this dilapidated Taoist temple. This made him sigh. It's good to have money. In fact, he has no ability to tell fortunes, but don't forget that not long ago, he and the mother and son had tea at Fengley Tower at the same time. At that time, everyone who listened to the song Peach Blossom Temple sung on the stage below clapped their hands and applauded, but only the mother and son behaved strangely. The woman hid her face and went downstairs. She could faintly hear sobbing. Sunding's face was dark and unhappy, as if he had been stabbed in a painful spot. At that time, based on his feelings from the last time he listened to the book Bodhisattva's Tomb, after careful consideration, he guessed that this scene might be an allusion to the story of their mother and son. Only then would he pretend to deceive them. What should I do if I guess wrong? He doesn't care about this. If he guesses wrong, he guesses wrong. It's just for fun anyway. It was the fool who put the blame on Sunding's head. I don't know whether the fool did it intentionally or unintentionally. Anyway, looking at the fool's cheerful look, he couldn't help but laugh, and specially took out some snacks from the prop book to give him as a reward. Lying on the chair, he first felt funny about the success of this fraud, but he couldn't laugh any more after laughing. He looked at the thick stack of 10 yuan bills in his hand, with a cold glint in his eyes from time to time. He threw the money on the table, took out the hookah and started smoking. Zzz. After the flickering tobacco in the pot flickered for a few times, a thick cloud of smoke came out of Su Tong's mouth and nose. Unlike cigars, cigars need to be tasted, and the aroma left between taster's lips and teeth is slowly and carefully tasted. But hookah is different. The taste goes straight to the back of your head. After the spicy taste, it is not as dry as cigarettes. Instead, after being filtered by water, you can taste the natural and soft taste of tobacco. It's the kind of tenderness after domineering, which will give people a kind of quiet enjoyment in the years. Su Tong sat on the chair, puffing away the smoke, his eyes flashed with a cold light from time to time, as if he was thinking about something, while the fool on the side ran around the smoke curiously. He was full of curiosity about the hookah in Su Tong's arms. He stared at the delicate patterns on the pipe with his eyes wide open, as if he was observing a piece of art, mesmerized. Finally, Su Tong put down the chimney in his hand and thought of the key to all the problems. The wind comes to the building. This place was becoming more and more difficult for him to understand. If Fenglai Building was renamed a fortune-telling parlor, and after you sat down, an old Taoist priest would come to tell you your fortune. No matter how accurate the fortune-telling was, he wouldn't feel that there was anything scary about it. But when the wind comes, everything in the building is so normal that you can't find anything suspicious. But it is this normality that always makes you feel that everything here is inextricably linked to you. Association. According to Taoist Zhu, he didn't know Su Tong's appearance at first, but after he sat down, he received a note saying that whoever sat in the second row of windows in front would be his target. And he happened to be sitting in that position. He was led to the west by a poem. After killing the Taoist, he met Gao Zhou again. Then he came to Bamang unknowingly, and relying on the song Peach Blossom Temple at that time, he easily extorted a large amount of money from the mother and son. Everything seems to be a coincidence, but the more I think about it, the more chilling it becomes. It always feels like some big hand is manipulating everything in the dark. Thinking of this, Su Tong's eyes couldn't help but flash with a cold light. Fool, watch your door. I'll go out and bring you some snacks when I come back. As soon as the chimney was put away, Su Tong tore off the jack mask to reveal his true appearance, took the money and walked out of the Taoist temple. Fenglai Lu is such a weird place. It seems to be helping him, but in fact it is pushing him deeper into this undercurrent step by step. Since you are going to use yourself as a chess piece, it is a good time to let yourself see if your chess piece can be as good as Feng Lelu. Thinking of this, Su Tong walked straight towards Fenglay Tower as if he didn't recognize his relatives. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 207. Clatter. There was a shock, and there was no one in the hall. The old man looked at everyone with a smile and raised his voice. How about we talk about traditional storytelling for a while today? Good. Everyone below clapped their hands and applauded. They all knew that the old gentleman's storytelling mostly consisted of weird stories, but today it was rare for him to speak a serious story about storytelling. How could everyone not cheer for him? Brother, what are we doing here? Three heads poked their heads out from the window seat on the second floor. It was Gao Zhou and his party. As Gao Zhou spoke, he couldn't help but look around. He also learned the name of Feng Lelu from his old man. The old man's evaluation of this tea house was very unusual. He said that this place is both a river and a lake, but not a river and lake. The wind blows and the trees cannot calm down, and the wind leaves no trace. No one can say how wonderful this tea house is. No matter how ordinary this tea house is, everyone who has been to this tea house in the world would call it evil. If there are waves in the rivers and lakes, the wind will come to the building to find the true chapter. This is what the old man said back then, and he has longed for Feng Lelu for a long time. I heard Su Tong talk about the evil nature of this tea house before, and my heart was even more itchy. Until today, when I finally had the opportunity to come to this tea house, I was like Su Tong, looking left and right, but I couldn't understand the mystery. It's just an ordinary tea house, and there's nothing particularly evil about it. That's why I asked Zhu Xiang and He Huangzai in front of me. Zhu Xiang grinned, with a mysterious look on his face, while He Huangzai patted him on the shoulder and said, "Third brother, don't ask, just taste it when you come, taste it carefully, and you will be able to taste it slowly. Taste it." Hearing this, Gao Zhou cursed in his heart, "I think you are an old sycophant. I should have drowned you too in the water. I am really blind to save you too." Just as Gao Zhou was speaking in Xiangzi dialect, he was greeting the two families. I only heard the old man downstairs snapping the alarm again, as the old saying goes, 1 lu, 2 zhao, 3 dian wei, 4 passes, 5 horses and 6 zhangfei, huang su, sun tai, 2 ziahe, 2 su pang, ganzhou and wei. The magic gun Zhangxiu and Wen Yan, although he is brave, his fate is too tragic. Of the 24 generals of the three kingdoms, Deng Ai and Zhang Wei were defeated. A setting poem, said with great momentum, caused everyone below to applaud. The old gentleman's eyes shone brightly. "Everyone, we are not going to talk about Lu Buletin and Guan Yu. Today we are just going to talk about Zhao Zilong, who is full of courage and courage. He entered and left Changban Po 7 times. Wontons, rice noodles, rolled dough." When Su Tong walked to the streets of Tianqiao, he could hear the shouts of vendors. More importantly, the smell was overwhelming and there were all kinds of snacks. Su Tong suddenly felt that the glutton in his stomach was being attracted. There is a small shop specializing in rice noodles by the river. When I walked over, I smelled a faint medicinal aroma and a bit of a stinky smell. But the business was surprisingly good. Su Tong sat down and ordered a large bowl, and soon the rice noodles came out. Unlike other rice noodles, this rice noodle uses chicken soup made from medicinal foods. The rice noodles served are not ordinary thin rice noodles, but yellow rice noodles mixed with cornmeal. Sprinkle a spoonful of sesame seeds, a layer of red oil chili pepper, and a thick layer of chives on top. Just the smell of it makes people salivate under their tongues. The big bowls of this era were really big. A bowl of rice noodles only cost 4 cents. Even an adult would burp after eating one bowl just because of the portion. But for Su Tong, it was just an appetizer. After finishing one bowl, he ordered wontons from a restaurant next door, a large bowl of oil tea, and a basket of steamed buns. Burping, he stood up. Under the strange looks of everyone, he stood up, paid and left. Before leaving, I didn't forget to buy a beef pot helmet and nodded while walking. This is probably the sequelae of physical enhancement. I have only improved my overall physical fitness twice, and the total increase is only 50%. It is said that those players who specialize in close combat will try their best to improve their physical fitness. Once they reach a certain level, they don't need to spend script points at all, and a casual punch can be enough to crush ordinary players. However, the principle of equivalent exchange will never go out of style. These people have improved their physiques to an inhuman level. No matter how much ordinary food they eat, it is difficult to fill their stomachs. Their hunger will even greatly reduce their strength and even threaten their lives. To put it bluntly, if these people have no food, they will starve to death faster than ordinary people. So every time I enter the script, I have to buy several large boxes of high-calorie compressed bars at the exhibition to use as food. In addition to being super high in calories, this kind of food is almost as unpalatable as dog food, and the price is not cheap. It can be regarded as a drink and a peck, there must be a reason for it. It was already approaching the afternoon, and more people were on the street. Su Tong was eating kuakui and walking forward. Suddenly he felt something. He subconsciously ducked to the side and wiped his shoulder with one hand. Suddenly his eyes turned cold, and when he glanced sideways, he saw only a man. Looking at his empty hand, he looked at Su Tong with some embarrassment. "Oh, brother, you lost your money." The man pointed to the green 2-cent card on the ground and smiled at Su Tong. Su Tong didn't look at the money. He looked up and down at the man. He was in his 30s, with a Chinese character face, a flat head and glasses, and a simple and honest look on his face, like an honest teacher. "Sorry, this isn't mine." Su Tong stared at each other as he spoke, took 2 steps back, turned around and squeezed into the crowd. The man was stunned when he saw this, and his expression suddenly turned sinister. He reached out to pick up the money and put it into his pocket. After thinking about it, he turned and walked towards the other side. Remember, when you are walking around the world, no one can tap you on the shoulder. Even if they accidentally bump into you, you have to be careful about other people's plots. This sentence is what Mr. Song often talks about, because back then, the master was accidentally touched by someone and got hit. From then on, Mr. Song had a strong obsession with this aspect. Su Tong was also extra cautious about this. He thought carefully about the man's hands just now. His fingers were rough and there were raised calluses on his fingertips. He looked like a Lianjiazi, which did not match his appearance at all. The slap he just hit on his shoulder was fast and accurate. If he hadn't felt something in his heart and subconsciously dodged it, he might have been hit by it. Thinking more carefully about the list of messages written by Taoist Zuzu to himself, Qinju was surrounded by a man named Mr. Ji Ming. His sinister and vicious Jing Xin palm was similar to Taoist Zuzu's iron sand palm. It's just that after Master Zuzu's iron sand palm is refined to perfection, his fingers are as delicate and white as green onions and tender bamboo shoots, making it difficult for people to notice. But Mr. Urgent's urging hand is not so magical. The fingers are like hooks and the joints are thick, making it easy for people to guard against it at a glance. Thinking of this, he immediately understood that he was being watched by the 1,000 hands at this moment. Looking at the crowd passing behind him, he did not see the figure of Mr. Urgent anymore, but the strong sense of peeping appears to oneself from time to time. Obviously there is more than one person on the other side this time. All 4 masters around Senju are likely to come, and even Senju himself may come in person. For a moment, Su Tong raised his eyebrows slightly. Instead of being nervous, he was a little excited. He also wanted to see what was so special about Kinju and his group, or how mysterious Kinju himself was. Suddenly he deliberately slowed down, his eyes paying attention to everyone passing by. Huh! At this time, he suddenly noticed a big bald man sitting in the tea shed in front of him. His bald head was illuminated by the light bulb in the tea shed. It was as dazzling as an oversized light bulb in the crowd, and it was difficult not to attract attention. The other party also noticed Su Tong and waved to him with a smile. "Man, another bowl of high chops." Before Su Tong came over, the bald man shouted to the waiter. Su Tong sat down, and the waiter had already placed the tea bowl in front of him. The tea here is not sold by pots, but by bowls, and a big bowl was filled to the brim. The tea brewed is called high broken. The so-called high broken is not the name of a kind of tea, but the tea shop sells out the tea leaves and collects the remaining various residues for sale. The price is very cheap, but the taste is also good. A big bowl is very mouth-watering. What do you call brother? When the bald man saw Su Tong sitting down, he asked with a smile. Su Tong took a sip of tea. The tea tasted very muddy, but it was surprisingly fragrant. There was no aftertaste, but it was quite satisfying after one sip. Hearing what the big bald man said, he said without raising his head, "My surname is Xiu Mingzong, and I like beating monks the most." After saying that, he glanced at the other man's bald head and pretended to be surprised. "Oh, you are not a monk." When the big bald man heard this, the corner of his mouth twitched a few times, and his heart was even more stunned. This question was obviously directed at him. His nickname was Monk Ming. Su Tong even knew this. I'm afraid his good friend, Tai Zhang the Taoist, is already in a bad situation. Thinking of this, Monk Ming couldn't help but sneer. An eagle with broken feathers is not as good as a chicken. Old friends, don't be afraid. Today, I will officially face you. If you pass the threshold, let's go round and round. The people drinking tea on the side didn't understand Monk Ming's slang, so they just thought he was speaking in dialect and didn't care. But some people understand that what this means is that the police who take off their official uniforms are worse than ordinary people. They have never been afraid of this group. I want to meet you today just to see what kind of sect you are. Let's compete and try out the depth. Boss pays. Immediately, 3 or 5 people in the tea shed dropped their money and left. Apparently they understood the dirty talk and didn't dare to stay here, so they left quickly. Su Tong took a sip of tea, and after listening to what Monk Ming said, he couldn't help but look him up and down and sneered, "Wen Pan Wu Pan, let's draw a line." This is what Monk Ming was waiting for. When he slapped the table, he saw 2 coins being knocked directly into the table. "Happy, as long as you can walk out of the street alive today, our problem will be cleared." Cleared. Su Tong raised his eyebrows and looked at Monk Ming coldly. Under the clear black and white eyes, it was like a ball of cold fire was beating, which made Monk Ming's heart jump. He couldn't help but be surprised. It's so big. Evil spirit. At this time, Su Tong held his chin and looked at Monk Ming. "In this case, I also hope that you can get out of the street alive." As he spoke, the hands holding his chin suddenly crossed together, placed in front of his chest, and bowed towards Monk Ming. Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 208. Monk Ming's eyes widened, and an iron fan flew out from his sleeves and landed in his palm. He spread the fan across his chest. He tensed up when he saw Su Tong's gesture, almost having the same reaction as Taoist Zuzhu. It is nothing more than worrying that Su Tong has an arrow in his sleeve and a bow in his back. Just when he was about to call out to Su Tong, as he was walking around on the street not to reveal the murder weapon, he didn't know that Su Tong bowed down with one hand, and Monk Ming's head started buzzing. His eyes went black, and the scene around Su Tong became blurry. He could vaguely see a black energy coming from around Su Tong. In just a moment of confusion, Su Tong Gren stood up from the tea table and walked slowly into the crowd. "Please enjoy your drink, sir." The waiter at the tea stall came over to collect the money and found that all the money had been slapped into the table. He couldn't help but glared at Monk Ming's face carefully from the corner of his eye. I saw Monk Ming's eyes staring forward like bells, his chubby face had turned black and purple, and the temples on both sides of his forehead were frighteningly bulging. "Sir, what is this?" The waiter tried to reach out and pat Monk Ming's shoulder, fearing that he would choke on the tea he drank too hard, but his hand just touched him. Puff. Monk Ming's blood spurted out 2 meters away. His body swayed and his head fell to the ground. For a moment, everyone in the tea shop was in a hurry. They didn't know what was going on. They just thought that someone had a sudden illness and hurriedly called for help to send the person to the hospital. In fact, Monk Ming was not seriously injured, but he was caught off guard by Su Tong's slam dunk, which seriously injured his soul. For a while, he didn't even have the strength to stand up. This is not Ming Monk Taeke. As the saying goes, one move can be eaten all over the world, but it is really the Taiyan damage caused by Beishan Cow. Even if they were on guard, Monk Rumming and Taoist Zuzu watched Su Tong bow down, but what they were wary of was the hidden arrows that might be hidden in his cuffs or the crossbow mechanism behind his collar. Who would have thought that this guy would hit him with magic damage, catching him off guard, and he was blinded on the first visit. Su Tong seriously injured Monk Ming and did not attack again. On the one hand, he was walking around in the street. There were rules for walking around. No weapons were seen, and no crowds were shocked. Everyone was fighting for the same method. On the other hand, if someone dies suddenly in public, it will inevitably attract the attention of the police. This is not what Kinju and the others want to see, let alone what they want to see. I saw him standing up and walking towards the other end of the street, changing positions left and right in the crowd, scanning the surroundings, waiting for Monk Ming's accomplices to take action. At this time, a man in a gray coat walked up to Su Tong in the crowd. They were 1 meter apart, but their steps were surprisingly consistent. "Good idea, little brother, how about you let me accompany you for a while?" After the man finished speaking, Su Tong suddenly felt a strange feeling. He couldn't tell what was wrong, but he always felt like he was being caught. With a sideways glance, I saw the man's face was calm, but his steps were getting heavier and heavier, and a layer of dust was stirred up on the ground when he stepped down. What's even weirder is that his own pace unknowingly follows the opponent's rhythm. No matter whether he deliberately slows down or speeds up to move forward, he can't get rid of this strange sense of rhythm. With every step I took, I felt the strange feeling in my body getting stronger and stronger. He has never seen this kind of strange technique in King Yun's strange technique record, but he has a strong sense of it. If he continues like this, he will not be able to walk a few steps, and he is afraid that his internal organs will also be affected by this strange force. Shattered. Thinking of this, he simply stopped walking. When the man saw this, he also stopped and stood next to Su Tong, looking at the crowd in front of him. "Little brother, this street is very long. It only takes these few steps. Are you just tired?" "Then I'm just tired. What can you do?" Su Tong asked. "You have to go even if you are tired. Throughout your life, many people want to stop, but sometimes stopping is a dead end. Only by keeping moving forward can you find a way to survive." As the man spoke, he lifted his robe with his fingers and raised one leg. Su Tong was surprised to find that when the man stepped forward, his own legs started to move forward uncontrollably, as if there was a force pulling him. Seeing the surprised look on Su Tong's face, the man pinched the mustache on his chin with his fingers. "Look, you think you can stop, but a man is like a lonely boat, drifting on the rivers and lakes, and he wants to leave. Stop, it's up to you to decide which one." As he spoke, he continued walking. Seeing this, Su Tong frowned, then took the initiative to speed up and cross in front of the man, looking back at him. Since you like walking so much, then I will let you walk as long as you can. As he spoke, he didn't even look at the man, and just strode forward. When the man saw this, he felt suspicious in his heart. He didn't know what this kid was up to, but he was confident that this kid had been hit by his magic and had no chance of escaping. He wasn't afraid of what kind of trouble he might make. So Su Tong walked in front, and the man followed behind. In just 3 or 5 steps, big beads of sweat began to appear on Su Tong's forehead, and even his breathing became rapid, like an old man who had just come down from the fields. Panting like a cow. Hey, let's see how long you can go. Seeing this, the sneer on the man's face became even thicker, but he couldn't help but be surprised in his heart that his strange technique came from the secret technique of the San Mao sect Fang Con 1,000 miles. Every step he takes is equivalent to 1,000 steps taken by him, and step by step the pressure becomes greater and greater, and he becomes more and more tired as he goes. In the end, even a cow cannot walk very far and will die of exhaustion. But this kid was only sweating a little and breathing heavily. He couldn't help but be surprised. How could this kid have such good physical strength? Just when he was thinking about how long this kid could last, he suddenly felt a sharp pain in the sole of his foot. When he looked down, he saw a nail appearing under his foot. The nail is about the size of a thumb. Pull it out and take a closer look. It's actually made of paper? Paper nails. Looking at the nail that was pulled out, the man's face suddenly became strange, as if he had something in his heart. He looked up and saw Su Tong with his back to him, lowering his head and looking back, with a sinister smile on his face. Photo, you said, if I want to leave, you can't stop, right? The smile on his face became more ferocious as he spoke, and when he opened his hand, he saw densely packed small paper nails falling from his palm and clattering under his feet. The scattered paper nails seemed to have eyes, all scattered around the soles of the man's feet without any bias. Looking at these scattered nails, the man's face suddenly became ugly. These paper nails looked soft and floppy, but little did he know that after Su Tong used the spirit enchanting technique to strengthen them, the hardness of the nails was no worse than those of iron. Seeing that the man's expression was dull, Su Tong tried to lift his feet and stepped forward. As soon as he left, the man's expression changed drastically, and he had to follow Su Tong's steps and step up step by step. With this kick, all the dense paper nails were stuck into the soles of the man's feet. Suddenly, the man's eyes were blinded by pain, and the veins on his hands became tense. It is said that 10 fingers are connected to the heart, and the fingers are 10 fingers, so is the toes, not to mention the excruciating pain in the soles of his feet, which almost made him cry out. He was also a bloody man. Seeing the blood seeping out along the uppers of his shoes, he calmed down, glared at Su Tong, and said with a smile on his face, "You have the guts, let's see who among us can outlast the other today." As he spoke, he suddenly swept his toes, sweeping up the dust on the ground, sweeping away the paper nails, and took advantage of this moment to jump forward with one foot. However, just when his foot was about to land, Su Tong hooked his fingers, and suddenly the paper nails that had been swept away quickly emerged from the feet of the people around him. Like lively and cute elves, they quickly gathered on the soles of the man's feet. Ah! This time the man couldn't bear it anymore and fell to the ground, holding the soles of his feet with both hands, his face trembling with pain and tears falling down. "What, you're not leaving? If you don't leave, I'll keep walking." Su Tong knelt down and looked at the paper nails stuck in the soles of the man's feet, and couldn't help but laugh. "You despicable!" The man's face turned pale, and his teeth could not stop chattering just when he spoke. He could only glare at Su Tong. "Say it as if you are very bright." Su Tong curled his lips and stood up to leave when suddenly there was a commotion in front of him and someone shouted, "It's not good that the water tanker has overturned." Get out of the way. As soon as he finished speaking, there was a loud bang sound, and a splash of clear water poured down from the ramp above. It turns out that people at this time did not have running water, so they had to go to wells to drink water. But in some places, there was a lot of water and there were no wells nearby, so they used carts to pull huge buckets to deliver water. Now this bucket of water is spilled, instantly making the streets wet. When the man took a look, he found that the paper nails melted away immediately after being stained with water. He immediately became energetic and stood up from the ground, staring at Su Tong like a vicious wolf. Hey hey! He ignored the wounds on his feet and stepped randomly on the accumulated water on the ground. He looked at Su Tong with a proud look, meaning, come on? You continue, our account is over today. Without the threat of paper nails, he would definitely exhaust Su Tong to death today. Su Tong glanced at the water under his feet and couldn't help but squint in the direction of the cracked bucket in the distance. This thing was so big and fixed on the cart with ropes that it couldn't easily fall to the ground. Taking a closer look, he saw the person who wanted to pat him on the shoulder, standing in the crowd with his arms folded, looking here with a half smile. Seeing this, Su Tong was not angry. He turned to look at the man and silently gave a thumbs up. Congratulations, you have a good brother. Of course. The man raised his head and cupped his hand in the direction of the urging hand, with a proud look on his face. But when he turned around, his eyes suddenly widened, and he saw Su Tong holding a white plastic bag in his hand. He didn't recognize such an exquisite package, but he still recognized the words on it. There was only one word on it, salt.